Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to WKYC's digital NFL draft preview, looking ahead to the 2020 NFL draft, kicking things off on Thursday night with the first round. A little different this year with obviously everything that's going on, and this is going to be a digital draft, not happening in Las Vegas as planned. But we're going to take you through this draft through the Cleveland Browns' eyes. And joining me today is the voice of the Browns and WKYC's own Jim Donovan. And WKYC Sports is Nick Camino. And guys, first of all, it's great to see you. I miss seeing you guys around the newsroom. And I think, one thing I miss talking to you guys and just chatting Browns around the newsroom. One thing I miss with that is I don't know where you guys are with the Browns right now. So before we dig into this draft, I thought the first thing we'd do is just kind of do a little state of the Browns and see where each of us are with the Browns. And Jimmy, I'll leave things to you here.
Well, I'll first say that by the time we get a chance to get back to Channel 3, I'll need my GPS to find my way back down there. It's been so long. And I'm not very good at direction. The state of the Browns is an awful lot accomplished, I think, during free agency. I mean, I think they really went out. They were just super aggressive in free agency, and they obviously had a lengthy shopping list, and they went out on a couple of days, and specifically on that first day, and they really attacked it. And they kind of clicked off a lot of the boxes that they needed to check off. I mean, they got a tight end. They ended up, getting an offensive lineman, a right tackle. They got a backup quarterback, and then they kind of sifted their way over to the defensive side. And so they've gotten a lot done. But I think after you take a look at what they get done in free agency, it's pretty obvious, I think, where they're going to go and where they need to go in the draft. I think their needs are pretty self-explanatory. They got to come out of here with a left tackle. And it's a pretty good year to need a left tackle. They need a safety, specifically probably a free safety. And they're going to need some help and some depth at linebacker now that Joe Schobert and Christian Kirksey have left via free agency because they brought in B.J. Goodson. It's on a one-year deal. They're pretty young beyond that, so they're going to need some help at linebacker.
Got some new uniforms, too. Can't forget that.
Yeah, which are the old uniforms, which I love. I'm glad they did it.
Yeah, you're not alone. Nick, what about you? Where are you at with this Browns team?
Yeah, I mean, to echo everything that Jimmy really said, I like what they've done. I know a lot of us were saying similar things last offseason, but I really like what they've done. Jimmy mentioned getting the tight end and getting an offensive lineman too. So you still feel like they could go get an offensive lineman or two in this upcoming draft, but what they've been able to do has been effective, you feel like, at least on paper. And I know all of us know that the games are not won on paper, but everything that they've been able to do up until this point, Andrew Berry and the guys in the front office, they get an A+ for me. It's so funny. I think we get so caught in that word analytics. That's always been thrown out there. And I know, as Jim has said before on 3 News, a lot of teams are using analytics. It's just a tool to help these guys identify some playmakers. So I think that they've gotten some guys that can really help them. And hopefully now with the draft, they can add even more to a group that we all know is talented already on both sides of the football. Do they have some holes? Of course, a lot of teams do. But I really like how they've positioned themselves going into draft weekend.
Barring a trade for Trent Williams, his name's out there, signing Jason Peters. With the number 10 pick, the Browns have the number 10 pick in this draft. Is it offensive line or bust? I mean, is this number 10 pick going to be an offensive lineman? And if so, do either of you have strong – it's not like quarterbacks. When we debate quarterbacks, they're kind of guys you can stick your flag in and say, this is my guy. Do either of you have any strong feelings about the offensive lineman in this draft?
Well, it's a good group. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There are a couple of things that are, kind of make you scratch your head a little bit, that make it seem like a couple of the guys might not be automatic, only in the sense that the Browns obviously need a left tackle. And there are a couple of guys, and right up at the top in the offensive line class, that are kind of right tackle guys that everyone keeps saying there'll be no problem, going over to the left side. And, I think that's easier said than done. I know a lot of people have varying opinions on that. So I think the Browns have 2 guys that they really like at tackle. I think one of them is Andrew Thomas, the left tackle out of Georgia, who played right tackle his first year at Georgia, but then went to left tackle. His first year, he blocked for Nick Chubb to the national championship game. But he's got he's got more left tackle experience. And I think they like the athletic ability of Tristan Wirfs, the kid from Iowa, who really can do a lot of things and athletically is off the charts. Will's from Alabama. He's a right tackle, so you'd be kind of going on a promise that he could go over there. Becton is a big guy. There's no doubt about it. He had a great combine, and I know there's a flag test there that needs some description and some clarification. There's also, a little bit of a worry maybe that, there could be a weight problem there. I mean, he's a guy that's big, and he fights to keep his weight down to 364, 365. Some people say, he could balloon, which would be a massive problem. So I think the two guys they like would be the kid from Iowa and Andrew Thomas from Georgia.
Yeah, I think those two names stick out to me as well. One, I think Andrew Thomas is just like, if you need a left tackle, and that's what that's the hole they're trying to fill. Like, he stands out as that guy who you feel best about week one, whoever they're playing in September, filling in and running out there next to Joel Bitonio and being your starting left tackle. I think Wirfs, though, he almost gives you that balance of both high upside and a high floor. Some of the other guys, they're a little more low floor, high ceiling. I think Wirfs is a good mix as far as getting, both that value at number 10 and also getting a guy who you feel pretty good about starting as your left tackle as a rookie. Nick, what about you? Any of these left tackles or right tackles for that matter standing out to you?
I got a Big Ten bias. I like Wirfs. I saw what Kirk Ferentz said over the weekend, that he feels like he'll have no problem sliding over, and he feels like he could start at left tackle from day one. Of course, he's going to say that about one of his guys, but I really like Kirk Ferentz. The only thing I have with Wirfs is that I'm thinking the Giants might be a team that would need an offensive lineman. I know they've been linked to him. I know we hear so much stuff under the sun nowadays, but I feel like the Giants have been a team that have said, okay, if we're going to give Daniel Jones some protection and we're going to block for Saquon Barkley here, we better get some guys that can block for them. So a guy like Wirfs or Thomas could be maybe off the board by the time the Browns are picking. Totally with Jimmy on Becton. It just feels like there's some flags there. It's a big body. I know he ran the 40 very fast, and everybody was excited about that, but those bodies are sometimes tough to maintain as you get older and as you get into the grind of a season and stuff. So and then obviously the drug test was flagged. So those are a couple of warning signs I feel like that they could probably stay away from. But yeah, I guess I'd have a Big Ten bias and say Wirfs would be a guy that maybe they could take.
Ben, some of the things that you can go back in time in previous Browns drafts, and you don't have to go that far back either. But sometimes when people talk about, well, for instance, Joe Thomas made a comparison on Tristan Wirfs. And of course, we all think the world of Joe, and he's got a great eye, certainly for offensive linemen. He'll be in the Hall of Fame soon. But he said, I would envision down the road, Tristan Wirfs will be an all-pro guard in the NFL. And it just echoes, it kind of bounces off to me, what we were talking about with Austin Corbett when John Dorsey made him the top pick in the second round a couple of years ago. And we were looking for a Joe Thomas replacement. And people said, well, you know what? He can play guard, and maybe down the road he's going to be an all-pro center. And I think sometimes, the simplest route is to take the guy that plays the position that you need him to play. And that's why I get a little bit worried when I hear that this guy could be flexible and you could move him around. We need a left tackle, and we need him on opening day too. And that's what I worry about with some of these guys, that they say he could be a guy that could go anywhere. We need a guy to go to the end of the line on the left side and protect Baker Mayfield.
No, you're absolutely right.
If last year showed us anything, right, guys, it was, they were thin at that position from the beginning of the year, and they were doomed. And I guess that could be one of the knocks on John Dorsey. I know everybody loves Dorsey, but I felt like they were a little thin at offensive line, and they never really recovered.
No, absolutely. You look at a year ago at the left tackle position, they felt pretty good about having Greg Robinson at left tackle and Desmond Harrison behind them. And now neither of those guys are going to be playing football for the foreseeable future. So, this hole at left tackle is glaring. And then to a point you brought up earlier, Nick, at number 10, it's kind of a matter also of who's going to be there. There are teams like the Giants, the Jaguars. I think the Cardinals are kind of penciled in, taking offensive linemen. It might just be a matter of who's there. And, things could get tricky. And on that note, Andrew Berry said something the other day that the Browns are drafting for talent. They aren't drafting for need. And because that hole at left tackle is so glaring, it makes a lot of sense for us to be talking about left tackle. But if the guy let's say Andrew Thomas is the guy they want, and he winds up going to the Arizona Cardinals at number 8, at that point, do Do you have a little more faith in Andrew Berry's approach? Maybe faith isn't the right word, but you buy a little bit more in to the approach of maybe not looking at offensive tackle and looking for another position? And if so, what positions could you see the Browns even toying with the idea of taking at number 10?
Well, I think number one, I think Becton will be there. Okay, I don't know about Andrew Thomas, like you say. If you have your heart set on Andrew Thomas, you may be it might be a white knuckler down to the number 10 pick to see if he's going to be there. So I think they'll have a decision to make about Becton, because I think he will be there at number 10. If you're not sold on him, I think they trade down. I really do. And they may trade down anyway. I mean, these guys like to trade. And when they were in power a couple of years ago, they traded around a lot, to the point where sometimes I think they forgot where they were in the round and ended up settling for certain guys. So I think that they would be enticed to trade down, because I think the next wave might be teams that want to get up to that number 10 spot, because there might start to be a run on, for instance, wide receivers or cornerbacks, but especially teams that might need wide receivers, and they want to start the run off by getting up to the number 10 spot. If the Browns move down, and keep offensive line in the forefront, there's a second wave of offensive linemen. There are three other guys that kind of come out of the first four, and then there's a level of three other guys. Ezra Cleveland from Boise State, Josh Jones from the University of Houston, and Austin Jackson, left tackle out of Southern Cal. Those would be the next guys. But certainly not at number 10 would you take any of those guys, but it would depend how far you would go down. But if you go down, Ben, and you're going to delay the offensive tackle selection, then I think you're into the safety, linebacker, cornerback type of situation for the Browns.
Nick, let me throw a scenario out at you. Let's say the New York Giants, a lot of people have them penciled in for Isaiah Simmons at number 4. Let's say they go offensive lineman. Let's say they really like Tristan Wirfs. Isaiah Simmons starts to slide, and the Browns are up at number 10, and they have the pick of, let's say, Andrew Thomas, or a guy like Isaiah Simmons, who's a playmaking defender, someone, the Browns, especially at linebacker, I think lack that type of playmaker. Is there a player, and I'm using Isaiah Simmons here, but maybe it's Jeff Okudah, maybe it's somebody else. Is there a player at a position other than offensive tackle that would make you even think about taking another position at number 10, Nick?
That's a tough question. After hearing what Jimmy had to say too about them maybe trading back, that would probably be the most realistic scenario. If there is a guy though that I could see them maybe taking at 10, if it's not an offensive lineman, it would be Simmons. Jimmy, remember we were watching the national championship game together, and Simmons was all over the field for Clemson. I mean, this guy he's a beast. I think he had 8 tackles in the national championship game alone, and he was the ACC Defensive Player of the Year. He's a stud. And the one thing scouts have said about him is that they love that he can kind of be like a hybrid. He can go back to be a safety a little bit, and he can also come up and stop the run and be great in pass coverage too. So I almost feel like the Browns over the last couple of years, now there's no Schobert. They could be a little bit thin at linebacker. Simmons would be the guy that at least have to think long and hard about if it's not an offensive lineman there. I mean, the kid's a stud.
Yeah. Ben, that would be a very tough decision for them if Simmons is there, and even if one of the offensive linemen that they like is there. I mean, that would be an interesting decision for them. They always kind of envisioned Jabril Peppers being that kind of a player, and certainly in his rookie year, he wasn't allowed to be that kind of a player because he was playing so far back. But he started to show some signs just before, in his last couple of games as a Brown. He had that big sack against Denver, and he had some big plays. He started to play that role, and you're right, Nick, that's the new linebacker in the NFL, kind of that Swiss Army knife kind of guy that can do a lot of different things. It was kind of started, I think, by Greg Williams when he kind of converted Mark Barron into that kind of a player and brought him up into the box as a safety that had kind of linebacker type instincts, and other teams have copied that. And this kid certainly fits into that mode. And I have to tell you that would be an interesting discussion through the time period that they have before they made the selection. If he was still available on the board at that point in time, he would be an instant playmaking help for them on the defensive side of the ball, where they definitely need some help.
Yeah, I think with Simmons, that would ultimately be, the putting Andrew Berry's theory of drafting talent over need to the test. Jim, you've brought up wide receiver a few times before, and I think maybe there's an outside shot. There's some guys who could be in play at number 10, but just as far as this draft is constructed for the Browns. How big is how big of a need is wide receiver? Because obviously they have Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry, but both those guys are coming off of surgery, and behind them, there's not really a whole lot of depth, especially with Rashard Higgins not being re-signed.
Yeah, you're right. And I think in their thinking, they almost make Kareem Hunt a little bit of the wide receiver package. I mean, he's going to catch the ball out of the backfield so much, and especially in this offense, I think he's going to end up in the slot probably an awful lot, and he'll be a tough cover. So I think, you kind of throw him in there, but we'll put him in the running back category because I think that's where he wants to be. I think it needs to be addressed, Ben, and I think it's deep enough in this draft that they probably will get a shot to add to that. But I agree with you. I mean, you have guys like Damian Ratley. They had this kid Henderson that got hurt last year or Montgomery, that got hurt last year, and they still have him around. They have Taywan Taylor. They added the kick returner, former Akron Zip, JoJo Natson, who they brought over from the Rams. They really, Kaderil Hodge, who I think they count on, for Mike Prefer to have a great special teams player. And they, so far Higgins is still out there as a free agent, and there are no signs that they're going to go back to him. I think that, I can definitely see them in a draft-rich category of wide receiver this year, that they should definitely go in and get a young receiver and add to their room that way, especially, Landry and Beckham, are both coming off surgeries this offseason, and you wonder about their availability at the get-go.
Nick, you mentioned having a Big Ten bias a little bit earlier with Tristan Wirfs. Let me throw a name out at you. Donovan Peoples-Jones. When we've watched these Ohio State-Michigan games, there haven't been many guys in the maize and blue who have kind of stood out as threats, but Donovan Peoples-Jones has been one of those rare guys, 5-star talent. I think he's a guy who couldn't have been in a worse situation in college when you look at Michigan's quarterback play and their offense. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones, when you look at how deep this wide receiver class is, I don't even think you'd have to necessarily grab him with your second-round pick. I think maybe later in the second round or maybe early in the third round. But, Nick, what do you think about that, the idea of the Browns drafting Donovan Peoples-Jones or another, second-tier type of wide receiver?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is the tail end of what you said. You don't want that. Okay, obviously not the first round. And then I think second round would even be maybe a stretch. I think, as Jimmy said, it's deep enough where I think you're going to have quality guys you can get Friday night in the third round. I hadn't really thought of receiver too much because of the guys that we mentioned. You got OBJ, you've got Landry, you added Hooper. They've got targets for Baker Mayfield, and as Jimmy pointed out, Kareem Hunt can come out of the backfield too. So it's certainly a need. I just don't know how early you have to address it. But Peoples-Jones is a guy, as we said, we're here in Big Ten country, and he has been a weapon for Jim Harbaugh. So hopefully, if that's a guy who's there, third round, as you said, maybe tail end of the second round, that could be a guy they look at too.
The other thing to remember is this is going to be a heavy tight end offense. A lot of balls are going to go to the tight end. Now, a lot of balls are going to go to Hooper. I have to tell you guys, it will be interesting to see David Njoku's role, or if he has a role here. I mean, I don't know, if he is, put into the lineup right away. I think that there are some questions about what happened here last year, and I'm sure they've kind of sifted those things out as to what went on. There was the injury, but then there was a problem when he came back, to the point where he was a healthy scratch pretty much every Sunday near the end of the year. So he had a bad year. I think he ended up with only 5 catches on the season. But in its construction, as we look at wide receiver, and I think it's when they go and they add to the wide receiver room, I think it would be later in the draft, because I think the ball is going to go to the tight ends an awful lot in this offense.
Yeah, and you mentioned David Njoku. They have a decision to make on his 5th-year option here in just a couple of weeks, and with what they're paying Austin Hooper, who at least for a little bit of time is going to be the highest paid tight end in football. The writing might be on the wall as far as that's concerned. But every draft or every draft class, it has some sort of theme. It seems like last year it was really defense. They really bolstered that defense. Just a few years ago, I remember Sashi Brown's first draft. It was all about pass catchers. I think they took 5 or 6 pass catchers in 2016. Jim, what kind of identity do you think this draft class would have, or what would you like it to have?
Well, I think it's interesting, and I think again, you go back to the roadmap that they kind of laid out there in free agency. They made commitments to those guys on the offensive side. I mean, they made a big commitment to Hooper. They made a big commitment to Conklin. They made a very comfortable commitment to Case Keenum here. And, so they've done some work there as far as making big-time commitments offensively. But the guys they brought in over on defense, for the most part, those are all one-year deals, which means, and it would tell me that the roadmap would tell you that they're looking to get guys, young guys, to come in here and on the defensive side of the ball, at safety, at linebacker, perhaps at corner, maybe a pass rusher too, but certainly at linebacker and at safety. And that they don't have to push them into the lineup, but they're going to have to go in at some point because, I mean, when you take a look at the guys that they signed, both safeties got signed to one-year deals. The linebacker got signed to a one-year deal. Those aren't long commitments, which would tell you they're going to have to go get guys for the future. So I would think the theme would be that they start to fill in that defense with younger guys, let them grow up with these guys that they brought in on these one-year deals, and then hope it takes root that way.
Nick, what about you? When you're doing your wrap-up this weekend, what would you like to be able to just say in general about this Browns draft class?
Yeah, I think that if they could get some firm guys on that offensive line, if they can add to the offensive line and then just throw a ton of guys on that defense, I don't think it could hurt. The more bodies you have on that defense, it could certainly help them. So my main thing would be O-line probably early and then defense as you go. I know we talked about wide receiver, but if they could add to that defensive unit, guys, there's so many playmakers on the offensive side of the football. I mean, we all know them, and we haven't even mentioned Nick Chubb on this show. It's amazing. He's probably the best overall offensive guy. So if you can just add to that defense, you feel like the guys you have coming back are the guys you've signed over the offseason. Your offense should be in a good spot. Let's add to that defense and let's create that identity of a physical unit that just hawks to the football. That's what you want. I would, if they could do that, that would be great. I feel like I'm echoing a lot of what Jimmy said. Jimmy, I need you on the Zoom call with the Browns draft guys. That's what we need.
Well, let's go there. What do you guys think tomorrow's going to be like? I mean, it's going to be pretty bizarre having this virtual NFL draft and all these potential technical difficulties. I don't even know how to envision what this NFL draft is going to look like.
Well, I think it's going to be a very forgiving audience, okay? Because I think it's an audience that is craving, and count me as one of the people in there. And I bet you two guys too. I mean, I can't wait for an actual event. I mean, I think I have watched Game 7 of the Indians-Cubs World Series now 5 times over the period of time that we have been, kept inside of our homes, and we still keep losing that ball game. So, I mean, I think, Ben, it's going to be. I think the audience is going to be huge. I think it's great that the NFL has something to offer sports fans right now. So I think any technical glitches, and I'm sure there will be some. I mean, when they had the dress rehearsal the other day on the very first pick, they had a hiccup right away. So maybe they'll iron it out. But I think it will be a very forgiving audience. It might not be as smooth as it has been in the years, but I think people are going to be glued to it. And I think that here in Cleveland, I think that. It's going to be it's an interesting situation. That number 10 pick is a really interesting spot to be in because you're still in the upper half of that first round, and it's attractive to people to try and get up there. And you might end up getting a pretty good. I'm not saying a king's ransom, but you might end up getting a pretty interesting package from somebody that could make some things work, which I think would be right down the alley of Paul DePodesta and Andrew Berry. Now, they have to remember this, that they are not drafting for the 1-15, 0-16 Cleveland Browns anymore. I mean, if there's talent there, you make the pick because I think that this is more of a tweaking and finish the thing off rather than a monster rebuild that they were drafting for when they were in power the first time around.
Two things, Ben, from an IT standpoint of it. I think the Detroit Lions have the right idea. Didn't they say they're going to have the IT van right outside their driveway where they're doing this? Right. That's number one. And then number two, I know with the Browns, there's no way they can screw up the IT part of it. They've got a ton of Ivy League guys. There's a lot of brains in there. I think they'll be just fine with this.
That's a great point. Real quick, and then we'll get out of here. The rest of the AFC North, obviously it starts with the Cincinnati Bengals picking first overall with Joe Burrow. The Steelers don't have a first-round pick this year. They traded that in the Minka Fitzpatrick trade. And then the Ravens will have an opportunity later in the draft to probably add some more speed to either their offensive skill set or add a linebacker or defensive weapon. I'd ask you guys what stands out about the rest of the AFC North here, but it has to be Joe Burrow, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's such a perfect fit. Where he grew up, what kind of kid he is anyway. So, I mean, I think that, and what they need down there, I think that that's a franchise down there that has a fan base that really gets agitated with the ownership down there. I mean, they really do. And how they show it is they don't go to the games. I mean, really, they really do not go to the games. They get upset with Mike Brown, and they've been upset with him, maybe that he held on, to Marvin Lewis too long. Maybe the fact that, they don't go out, although they did this year, they don't typically go out and make a lot of moves in free agency. Now, they went against that tradition this year. They did spend a little bit. But I think that Burrow is the type of guy that certainly, at least he not only plays the part, but he certainly looks the part, that he's a guy that, you can build your franchise around. The Steelers are really interesting because of what they did last year, trading in the first round and moving to get the linebacker, and then trading out of the first round and getting Minkah Fitzpatrick. I mean, that goes against everything that the Steelers have done for decades. So what are they going to do? And at some point, are they going to come up with the future quarterback? Do they have to do that this year behind the next guy that's going to step in for Ben Roethlisberger once it's all over? That's going to be interesting to see, because I know a lot of people have been saying they've been interested in Jalen Hurts, the kid out of Alabama, and then ended his career at Oklahoma. They'll be interesting. And Baltimore, they're just going to add to a very talented team. I mean, I think Baltimore's just got to be very frustrated at the way the season has ended the last 2 years. They have lost playoff games and they've lost them at home, but they are so talented that it's just, it's a speed bump they've got to get over, but they know how to do it. They really do. Year in and year out, they really do things very wisely.
Nick, you're a big college football guy. What's it going to be like for Browns fans to go against Joe Burrow 2 times a year here?
Yeah, I think, hey, once you put on a different uniform in Cleveland, we've seen it. You're the enemy, and he's a great story. I've rooted for the kid. It's a cool thing that he's been able to go from Ohio State to LSU and now be the first pick. And I wish him all the best. But once you're against the Browns, it's a different story here. And as we've seen it reverse. Look at somebody years ago like Braylon Edwards, who was wearing the maize and blue, and I think for the most part at the beginning, Browns fans embraced Braylon Edwards. So once what you do in college, I think is a little bit different once you get to the NFL. So it'll be fun to watch him play in the AFC North, though, and I'm looking forward to the matchups of right now Baker versus Burrow versus Lamar Jackson versus Big Ben. You've got 4 quarterbacks that do a lot of different things. It's going to be a fun division. Yeah,
Baker versus Burrow could be the new Bernie versus Boomer. So. We'll see here. It should be fun. Last thing, and then we'll get out of here. With the number 10 pick in the 2020 NFL Draft, who are the Cleveland Browns picking?
I would have them take Andrew Thomas if he's there out of Georgia. I think it's a straight line pick. He's a left tackle. They need a left tackle. Everything about him says that the arrow points up. I think the thing would be that, he fits into that mold, that you draft a guy like that, you put him in the position, and 7 and 10 years go by and he's still in the position. That's what you hope for. And I think he gives you the possibility to be that kind of a player.
About a week ago, WKYC, they had me do this mock draft. And I said, this is impossible. This is like filling out a perfect bracket for the NCAA tournament. I can't do this. I'll do the first 10. And I had him taking Mekhi Becton. Then all of a sudden he gets flagged for this drug test. We hear about that. And he's huge now. We're hearing about his weight. So I'm not going to go with Becton. Jimmy's all over probably with Thomas. I'll be a little bit different just for the sake of some fun debate. I'll go with Simmons is there. They make a tough decision to go with the linebacker that they need.
I'm going to go 3 for 3. I've got them taking Tristan Wirfs here. So
all right,
we're all different, but I think all of those would be exciting outcomes for the Browns. And just like you guys, I'm just really looking forward to getting to this draft and to covering it. And we'll have you covered wall to wall on WKYC.com and on Channel 3 throughout Thursday, throughout the weekend. That's going to do it for our draft preview, though. For Jim Donovan, for Nick Camino, I'm Ben Axelrod. Thanks for watching.